Inside the implosion of one of South Carolina's most celebrated law enforcement leaders. Horrifying updates on not one, but two graphic cases of child sex abuse material. And last but not least, South Carolina's now former election leader under investigation for wiretapping. I'm Will Folks, the owner and founding editor of FITSNews.com. Welcome to another edition of your Week in Review. In the last decade and a half, 14 sheriffs in South Carolina have faced criminal charges, and that's before we get to the one that I'm about to talk about with our Andy Fancher. Folks, that's 30%, more than 30% of the sheriffs in South Carolina. We only got 46 counties. But the story that is above and beyond any previous sheriff bust is the saga of Chuck Wright. And Andy, I thought you had written the definitive piece on this before in the aftermath of Chuck Wright's resignation from office and the special election that followed. But I was wrong, because you penned this week on FITSNews one of the best pieces of journalism I've ever seen. But it's a deep dive into just the history of this guy, into how he went off course, into some of the just, I don't know, how do we describe these accusations? I mean, just borderline ridiculous allegations involving Candy Crush. The guy has a Candy Crush. Let's just start with the Candy Crush, man.
Well, I don't want us to get too hooked on the Candy Crush when there's, literal Roxys and Oxys that are also in the vortex of alleged dependency. But yes, on the topic of Candy Crush alone, according to sources, this is a source-heavy story. Yeah. And, actually, before we even get into just the absurdity of this, I do want to give a shout out, and I want to commend the retired and active law enforcement officers who made not only this report, but every Chuck report that we've ever done possible. It's easy to get just blinded by just the idiocracy of it all. I mean, when you've got, machine guns and pickup trucks and high altitudes and pills and prostitutes and all this crazy stuff, it's easy to lose sight of why these guys are talking.
Yeah.
All right. Because the same reason we're reporting, we're trying to effectuate change.
Yeah.
So going back to your initial question, yes, according to deputies of the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office, Chuck had a crippling, of all things, Candy Crush dependency. Eyewitnesses note that he would spend hours on the Sallyport loading dock of SCSO just clicking away at his Candy Crush app, purportedly sinking hundreds, potentially thousands of dollars into new lives and booster packs, taxpayer dollars going to good use.
He had several $1,000s in Apple charges.
Correct, but from
billed to the taxpayers?
Yeah, from the county credit card records that I obtained, that I was provided, from 2017 to 2024, we saw $12,000 to Apple alone. Now, that's not saying that all of it was Candy Crush related. In fact, there were some reoccurring payments to the tune of, $300 and some change. It appears as though he had some apps on his phone for helicopter mapping, which that's another vortex and a half. Just his aviation history. So, we have a gentleman who, according to sources, had a pill dependency where he was, shaking down deputies after learning that they would go to a doctor's office to see if they had painkillers. We have eyewitnesses noting that a bottle of Roxycodone fell out of his golf bag around 2015. We've got additional civilians noting that by 2023, he had pulled up to a crime scene of a newly deceased constituent to pay respect, but that respect payment ended with him purportedly popping a lid off of an oxycodone bottle and going bottoms up without a chaser.
Wow.
So amid that backdrop, you've got this guy going up in a helicopter. No problems
licensed?
there, right?
Is he a licensed helicopter pilot?
So it took some digging.
Yeah.
Jen Wood and I, we really started digging this week into the FAA's flight logs, not flight logs, the FAA's, record database where any and all pilots are stored. All we could deduce was that at one point in time, he did have the means to fly, but that those means appear to have expired in January of 2023. Yet, simultaneous with that, we were provided records from within the sheriff's office indicating that pilot Sheriff Wright was taking to the air after that.
Oh, boy.
So we're potentially looking at, in addition to everything else,
Yeah.
FAA violations.
Well, let's talk about some of the everything else, because one of the things I loved about your story was you provided this backdrop of kind of how we got here. And this is a guy elected in 2004, a hardcore Bible thumper, weaving scripture into a lot of his press conferences, really playing to the religious right up there in the
Mhm.
socially conservative upstate. But this is a guy who, one of the chief architects of civil asset forfeiture in South Carolina. He turned this thing into a freaking payday for himself, apparently.
Mm.
Basically, taking over assets from folks that got pulled over on Interstate 85, civil asset forfeiture on steroids, Chuck Wright. But it was when he decided to deputize his son in flagrant violation of state law, which you reported on.
Mhm.
That's really when, at least from a public perspective anyway, the wheels kind of fell off. But Andy, your report pointed out that there was some scrutiny on him from law enforcement even before that. Walk us through kind of how did Chuck Wright unravel?
Right, the great unraveling of the great Chuck Wright. I mean, I have always pointed my finger to his deputization of Andy Wright. I mean, his biological son, which, I mean, you go to the Ethics Reform Act of 1991, you can't do that.
Right.
But clearly, rules did not apply to Chuck Wright. You know, that deputization appears to have been the straw that broke the camel's back.
Mhm.
Because for decades, people attempted to speak out on Chuck. And as we outlined in the article, they were blackballed from law enforcement. The
Mhm.
the cost of speaking out against that man, I mean, it significantly outweighed just the cost of keeping quiet.
Yeah.
Um, which unfortunately so many people did.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
everybody, and I commend the people who didn't.
Absolutely.
But going to the deputization of Andy, um, that is that is when we see our first true investigation into Chuck. Granted, a
Mm.
civil one by the
Right.
Ethics Commission
Mhm.
for allegations of nepotism, but you know from there there was a hole in his ship that he put there,
Yeah.
and we were of course the first to report on that deputization, which apparently led to what deputies describe a drug-fueled right to just go completely off the reservation, concerned that a mole within his department was providing information to none other than FITSNews.
That's right.
They said that the hysteria only intensified once we cranked up the heat, kicking out that article on one of his deputies, Alan Wood,
He's like
disseminating
changing
hardcore
cameras,
pornography. Yeah, not changing camera,
changing.
installing cameras,
Oh, wow.
considering a full change of the locks in the sheriff's office. In fact, if we turn to quotes specifically from the deputies speaking with us, here he'd play Candy Crush all the damn time. Where
Still can't get over
here we
that.
go.
Candy Crush.
Candy Crush of all things. He couldn't stand y'all, one deputy said. He wasn't worried about WSPA or Fox or even the Post and Courier. It was always, quote, somebody's feeding information to FITSNews, and he'd say, quote, Will Folks wouldn't know reporting if it bit him in the ass.
I love it, man. I love it.
So you carry quite a reputation up
Hey,
there
there you
yourself.
go. There you go. And what's funny though is that we had kind of, we wrote a lot on the civil asset forfeiture. We really hadn't been a burr in this guy's ass for
No,
years. I mean,
no.
it was only when he started doing these very public, clearly definitionally unethical things, as you said, that we started digging back into him. And I think, Andy, the other thing that's important to point out here is that this is a guy who, when the heat started appearing around the corner, decided he'd try to big dick it and make some phone calls. Tell us a little bit about one of these phone calls that he had with allegedly with the
Right.
chief of the state law enforcement division.
With none other than SLED Chief Mark Keel. Now, it's worth noting, this is according to Chuck.
Yeah.
All right. And I'm told that once rumor boiled over that none other than the feds were looking into Chuck, I'm told that he called a variety of agencies to see if he was truly under an investigation. And I was furthermore told that he would tell anybody who was listening that there's nothing to see here, folks. Almost like that scene in Naked Gun when there's the explosion behind it. Please move along, everybody. That's kind of what we're looking at here. But according to sources who knew Chuck personally, he told them that he called Mark Keel and that the conversation to the recollection of these law enforcement officers, Chuck purportedly asked, quote, "Hey, Mark, do y'all got an investigation on me?" And Mark Keel, who has been the leader of SLED since he was appointed to the position in 2011, appears to have responded like any seasoned cop would, especially one who was just contacted by the newly minted subject of a criminal investigation, purportedly responding, quote, "Chuck, you've seen the media reports. What do you think?"
Answering a question with a question. I love it. I love it.
And Chuck purportedly answers that question with statements along the lines of, quote, "Send whoever you want," and, quote, "I've got nothing to hide." And we're told, according to folks citing Wright himself, that Keel responded to the effect of, quote, "We'll make that happen next week. Oh, and by the way, the FBI will be joining them."
Oh, wow.
So it appears as though Chuck Wright invited investigators
Yeah.
into the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office to clear the air of any wrongdoing associated specifically with his county credit card spending that had just at this time been published and disseminated by the Post and Courier, where the world learned that he had racked up at least $53,000 to his county credit card between 2017 and 2024. It's worth noting that according to sources, he has carried a credit card since his first term in office, but it does not appear as though the records go back that far. How convenient.
Well, Andy, I know you got to be careful about some of what you've found, but I want to, because we're talking about Candy Crush. We're talking about, some misappropriated money on credit cards. We're talking about some things that are clearly wrong, nepotism. Clearly wrong, clearly outside the lines. But there's something deeper going on, and you uncovered a lot when you started sort of following the campaign finance threads. You started following some property records with Jen. You started looking at kind of who Chuck rolled and sat with, who some of his key players rolled and sat with. What we're looking at here is potentially a lot worse than just some misspent funds, some nepotism, and Candy Crush, isn't it?
From where I'm sitting, absolutely. Whether or not investigators have taken a hard look at what we've been talking about for months, whether or not they even care, remains unclear. But according to retired and active duty lawmen, it goes so much deeper than just what MSM is brushing upon in the upstate. I mean, what we have uncovered appears to be hardcore financial ties between Chuck Wright and a network of gamblers, illegal gamblers in the upstate. And once we started looking into particular families and hearing more and more stories, it got deeper and deeper and deeper so quickly. I mean, we were off the deep end almost immediately, and the information coming in is constant. But yeah, as I have reported multiple times, according to a deputy, he was directed by Chuck Wright to go to a location and pick up thousands of dollars in cash that from there was purportedly funneled right into his campaign coffers as early as 2004. So are we looking at a sheriff that was already bought and paid for before he even made office? That's a problem. And then when the sheer pervasiveness of video poker machines and pretty well established, not dime bag dealers, but major weight movers all throughout his county at like every corner, every turn, it makes it almost impossible to argue that he didn't at least know, and that members of his staff weren't complicit. It's something that we're actively looking into. It's extremely concerning that a man could truly walk around across 5 terms, 21 years,
like a god,
with a Jerusalem cross necklace tied around his neck, potentially lying to thousands and thousands of people. This was one of South Carolina's most recognizable cops. I mean, he had been on CNN, Fox, promoting, arming up, getting your guns, and, all these wonderful things. For what?
Well, folks, we have got a lot more coming on this story. I've been following up some of the threads that Andy's been pulling, and not going to believe what's coming
I mean, we're
next.
talking bodies, plural.
Yeah.
I mean, at least we are looking into
Yeah.
cases involving bodies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Andy, you've done amazing work on this, man. This was one of the hardest hitting pieces I think we've ever published. And you know what? This kind of truth to power, this kind of accountability, you noted it in what you were saying earlier. It's been lacking from the mainstream media up there. So, folks, you want a news outlet that's going to hold these cops accountable when they step out of line. And as I noted at the outset, there's quite a few of them. Andy Fancher's your man. FITSNews is your outlet. Andy, great work.
And I would just like to implore anybody listening to please reach out, Andy@FITSNews.com. All right. It has taken a literal village. It has taken a county to peel back the veil on what we have uncovered so far, but it's not even a chip off the iceberg. So if you know something, or even if you've just heard something, any and all communication with me is confidential. Again, that is Andy@FITSNews.com.
Great work, man. So, one of the biggest stories that we've covered this year is the saga of R.J. May, the former South Carolina state representative leader of the State Freedom Caucus, who was indicted earlier this year on multiple counts of distributing graphic child sex abuse material. This is one of the most disturbing cases we've covered, folks, and has taken a number of twists and turns since May's indictment back in June. I am joined by our research director, Jen Wood, who has been following this case very closely. We've had a real team effort on this story, Jen. You, me, Dylan Nolan, Andy Fancher, all of us have been very involved in this story. Andy broke some of the big parts of it. But you've been tracking a lot of the legal filings in this case. And, Andy reported, as we talked about on the last show, that May is representing himself against
Yes.
these federal charges, an incredibly risky endeavor, to say the least. But he's submitted filings in his new capacity as his own attorney. And the feds have submitted a filing as well as we prepare for next month's big trial on these 10 child sex abuse materials charges. Jen, these filings, as you noted in your report, are trying to define the parameters of the upcoming trial, kind of like the Murdoch case, where
Right.
we looked at all these motions that tried to limit evidence, tried to suppress certain evidence. Walk us through. Let's start with R.J. May's filings. Tell us about what is he attempting to do strategically ahead of this trial.
Right. So, yeah, like you said, this is very common in criminal cases. Going into a trial, the defense and the state or the federal government, they're all trying to present their case in the best light. So these motions, these pretrial motions, are very normal.
They're
RJ,
important too. They're
but
critical
they're critical.
because whoever wins
Because
or loses has a
Right. It's what defines what the jury is going to see. So RJ May filed 3 motions this week pro se. They are all handwritten motions. And I have to note, for somebody who has no law degree, they are fairly well written. I would have to
really
assume he's getting some help.
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they're pretty well done. He filed a motion to exclude evidence, a motion to suppress, and a motion to change the venue.
Hmm.
So, what he's hoping to exclude is evidence that came out of. He wants to ban any mention of other apps. So, in a lot of the court filings, like the indictment, they are talking about files that were sent via an app called Kick,
Okay.
and he wants to exclude any evidence from other apps, which I think is interesting.
Okay. Yeah,
He
that
also
raises some
wants
questions,
right.
but
He also wants to exclude his travel history. So as we know, there are allegations that he traveled to other countries to engage in acts with commercial sex workers. Whether or not any of those are underage, I'm not sure. But since he said he doesn't want the jury to hear any mention of that because they are not tied to the files for which he's charged with distributing.
but there are files related to those trips, and we've heard
Right.
reports of this. This was a line of inquiry that the feds did pursue, according to
Mhm.
our sources, but they were unable to conclusively prove that any of these foreign sex workers were underage. Jen, is the reports that we got back. But tell us a little bit though about the warrant and his efforts to suppress
Right.
this search warrant, because we reported, our audience may remember, back in August of last year,
Hmm.
We were the first to report on the raid at his home in West Columbia, South Carolina, and he wants to prohibit the introduction of evidence related to that raid. Walk us through this motion.
Right. So he is saying that the Homeland Security investigator who testified to the federal magistrate to get that search warrant used boilerplate language,
Hmm.
and that it wasn't specific to his case. I mean, basically, he would like a Franks hearing to
What
determine
is that?
that would where the judge listens to the evidence and determines whether or not the law enforcement personnel who requested the search warrant lied in the process to get it.
But doesn't he have to? I think I've heard of this. This is one he has to prove though before they even grant him that hearing that there is reasonable certainty that a lie was told to get probable cause. Is that correct?
Correct. That is absolutely correct. So,
It's a high bar.
right, it's a very high bar to set. But we're talking about, charges, 10 charges of distributing CSAM material.
Yeah.
Um, if he were to be convicted on all those,
Yeah. 20 years behind bars. Absolutely.
right, I mean, that's a long time.
And I want to go back because we knew a little bit about what was coming based on who was investigating him and what we'd learned
Mhm.
in the months leading up to his indictment. But Jen, when the federal government dropped their motion to keep him detained, we saw just the true horror. And we're not going to get into the depictions because they're just too awful. I can't believe that there are people who would consume this kind of material, let alone do the things. It's just
Yeah.
there's no depth of hell deep enough for these kind of people. But turning to what has happened since then, and as we look at sort of how this case is unfolding in the court, obviously there was a ton of coverage of it. RJ May is now trying to insist that that coverage has deprived him, at least in the South Carolina district,
Correct.
of his right to a fair trial. So that the third motion, a
That is
venue?
the change of venue, and, he cites, and God bless Andy Fancher, but he cites FITSNews quite a bit in that filing.
We ran out of you ran
He
out of
ran
free articles.
and with a lot there were a lot of exhibits
Yeah, the court
attached.
exhibit, folks, on RJ May's filing. You notice he's zero free articles left. So remember that.
You don't wanna
You
be like RJ, you wanna
don't
be
want to
able to
be like
read these
RJ.
articles.
Subscribe, right?
So, yeah, so he's he said that, clearly there's been governmental leaks because, the example is, Andy Fancher from FITSNews has been was there when HSA showed up to raid the house. He was there when he was arrested.
Mm.
And he does not believe that he can get a fair trial in South Carolina anymore and
Mhm.
thinks it should be changed.
Yeah. So, and we got to remember all this is occurring against the political backdrop of arguably one of the most impactful potential election cycles in South Carolina history. We have a
Hmm.
group of conservative lawmakers in the South Carolina House who are very close to getting to the one-third contingent of that chamber, which would enable them to uphold some of the vetoes in the event South Carolina ever gets a conservative governor. We'll see if that ever happens. But if a conservative governor were elected and they get to that number, which they're very close to, they could conceivably drive a lot of the policy. And so all of this happened to RJ May at a moment where that conservative movement was really building momentum. They had staved off a $2 million special interest push to knock him out. And you've done some reporting on some of the money fueling that, some of that trial lawyer money trying to maintain the status quo. So this is not something that's happening just in a criminal context, Jen. There are massive political ramifications from this RJ May story. But I want to ask you, as we look now at the federal government side, the motion that they submitted, uh, trying to define the parameters of this upcoming trial from their side, what did the feds have to say, Jen, about where they think this trial should go?
So RJ May was charged with 10 counts of just distributing child sexual abuse material. But there were hundreds of files transferred in the 5-day time period in which the feds are talking about. And they are saying that they want the jury to see evidence of all of those files that were
Mm.
transmitted, including, all of those conversations that he had in which those files on the Kick app, in which those files were transmitted back and forth, as well as charts that they created that show all of the states and all of the countries in which RJ May is alleged to have distributed these files. And I think it was 18 states when I counted, and I believe 4 or 5 countries.
Yeah.
But they're saying that they want to, even though he is not charged for each one of those files individually, that those are, and let me get the right wording, in they're entwined with the
Right.
with the charges against him,
Yeah.
with the files that he did distribute. So, they're coming pretty strong at him,
Yeah.
and
Well, as they should if it's true. And
right.
I got to tell you, think about being a juror on this case.
I can't even
I
imagine.
mean, yeah, I had a conversation not long ago with a friend of mine who's a judge who was talking about having to sign a warrant in connection with one of these cases.
Hmm.
And they were speaking about just one of these just horrific things. And I'm not going to get into the specifics, but it was a child being abused that was crying for their mother.
Right.
And when you hear stuff like that, you're a mom, I'm a dad of a lot of kids. And when you hear something like that, I mean,
And I have to say, like those the when you looked at the exhibits that the prosecutors attached to their motion, it is frightening to
yeah,
see all of these individuals in all of these states
all over
that
the place.
are
They're everywhere.
right.
They're
And
everywhere.
it was scary. It is scary for me as a mother.
Yeah.
Our kids are part of a generation that is
Yeah.
growing up online. Um, I I think if the jury does get to see that, that is very impactful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, RJ May, obviously, with a huge mountain to climb, representing himself against these incredibly serious charges. And as we have just mentioned, incredibly graphic charges, too graphic to even discuss over there. They're that bad, folks. But Jen Wood, thank you for your work in covering these motions and keep us up to speed. Obviously, as we get closer to this trial,
Right.
first we're gonna get a decision on
Right.
these. So
So
Judge Cameron Curry's got to decide.
correct. There's a pretrial hearing on September 24th at 9:30 a.m. in federal court. For those not familiar, you cannot film federal court. So we do
Correct.
the old school reporting where we go in, take notes, and then report afterwards what happened. And then jury selection right now is scheduled to begin on October 8th, with the trial beginning the next day.
Mm.
So I don't know if the change of venue motion were to be ordered on in RJ's favor, if that would delay that. But right now, those are the dates that we're looking at.
Well, folks, count on FITSNews to provide updated coverage on every step of these proceedings, as we have provided breaking exclusive reporting on the RJ May saga from the beginning. And now I will be joined by Dylan Nolan to discuss, sadly, yet another one of these cases here in South Carolina. So I'm joined now by our Dylan Nolan, and as mentioned, Dylan, we've got another one of these cases here in South Carolina. Broke very unexpectedly earlier this week, involving South Carolina Magistrate Judge James B. Skip Gosnell. This is a guy who's been on the bench in South Carolina for a very long time. He has denied bond for a lot of folks in this very situation and many others. But this Tuesday morning, it was Judge Gosnell on the receiving end of a warrant signed, this time by a federal magistrate, authorizing agents of the Homeland Security Investigations Unit to raid his residence in Charleston on the peninsula. And Dylan, walk us through a little bit about what they found when they conducted that early morning raid earlier this week.
So, according to charging documents, which have been filed in federal court, federal authorities received a tip from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC as it is abbreviated. And this is an agency where all of these providers, which have services online, message rooms, chat rooms, places where people hang out to exchange information, they are obligated to, if they run across people doing things which look like they're dealing in child sexual abuse material, report that to the authorities. And so they received these things called cyber tips.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a cyber tip associated with a person in the UK who was purportedly purveying images and videos of children being sexually abused.
This is the same kind of just horrific stuff we talked about with RJ May. The feds released some details of it, didn't they?
They did. And when they find information which leads them to believe that your IP or your computer address basically is accessing this information, that's enough for them to go to a federal judge and get a warrant to further look into your electronic communications. This is something that we saw in the RJ May story that we heard from. There was an initial search warrant, which before they go to your house allows them to start figuring out what's going on electronically.
Yeah.
And so they do that. They go, they confirm that your Wi-Fi is indeed the same Wi-Fi, through which these things have been accessed. They even do physical surveillance to figure out, okay, is the person at this address the person we believe them to be?
Mm-hmm.
They then go back to the judge, they get the warrant, and they
there's
come
a
and
lot
knock
of
on your door.
boxes they have to check off before they knock on the door and come in your house.
And all of this is spelled out in the charging document.
Mm-hmm.
It should be noted that the charging document is not an indictment. This has not been brought before a grand jury.
Mm-hmm.
But at this time, the feds have to lay out why they come to your house, why they arrest you. And
Mm-hmm.
they came to his house early in the morning, roughly 5 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And he opened the front door, according to this charging document. And when they explained what they were looking for, he purportedly pointed to a thumb drive which was plugged into his computer and said, "That's what you're looking for." And they described 3 of the images on this thumb drive, although there's purportedly hundreds of other ones on there. And the 3 which they described, once again, stuff that you can't really talk about on YouTube, but it's involving, infants. It's just stuff that it's hard to even write about on our website, where we don't have limits to what we can say, but there's still a level of basic human decency where people you don't want to put that image in their mind, but you obviously need to convey factually, roughly what is happening. But it is horrific stuff that they allegedly found, and he was denied bond. He had a federal bond hearing where they
he's got another one coming Monday, correct?
Right. So this is a probable cause hearing. Basically, when you're taken into custody legally, pretty rapidly, they have to bring you in front of a judge and explain to you what you're being charged with, and you get to start preparing your defense and preparing your arguments for why you should not be in jail. But you very rapidly have to be brought in front of a judge for that first hearing of basically why are you in custody.
Mm-hmm.
And that judge, obviously, given what I just explained, ruled that there was certainly enough evidence that he's a danger to the community and should not be released back out on pretrial detention.
Mm-hmm.
However, he will soon have another hearing, a formal probable cause hearing, where they will get more into the details of the case. That was not really the focus of this first hearing.
Right. And again, for those of us who have followed the RJ May case, a lot of the similar steps are now unfolding, and we fully expect that Judge Gosnell will be denied bond.
And it should be noted, he is no longer Judge Gosnell, as you were just saying.
Well, this is worth discussing, Dylan, because the first notice we received, even before we were able to confirm the substance of that federal search, was a notice, an order actually, from the South Carolina Supreme Court taking him off the bench, suspending him indefinitely, calling him a danger basically to the public by continuing to be on the bench. Very direct language from the Chief Justice. So that's a part of it that we've been watching. But these steps that we see unfolding, Dylan, as it relates to cases like these, we fully expect him to be denied bond. And I got to say, Brian Sterling, the new U.S. attorney here in South Carolina, these are 2 very high-profile cases. He has been very aggressive on these bond denial motions. And you mentioned earlier how difficult it is to talk about these things because we don't want to put just this horrific stuff in people's minds, but federal prosecutors, they have to put it in the mind of the judge to say, hey, this is why you cannot let this guy out while these charges are being adjudicated.
You can't beat around the bush in legal filings like this. There's no reason to. They should not. But, members of the media, I think we have obviously very different standards to which we operate.
Yeah, no, that's true. So, Dylan, obviously we've got this hearing on Monday. Fully expect bond to be denied. What are the next steps in this case? What happens next from the prosecutorial standpoint? Obviously, Judge Gosnell has an attorney who's representing him in this case, but how does this unfold from here?
So the RJ May story is unique in that most defendants in situations like this will not choose to take the case to trial. Gosnell immediately pointing to federal investigators and admitting to possessing this stuff obviously does not indicate that he's going to have a strong chance should he choose to go that route, which means that more likely than not, being somebody who does this professionally, he saw exactly where this is leading and will likely take a plea deal. this is the way that more than 90% of federal cases are resolved. It's the feds don't usually come knocking at your door until they are ready to prove a criminal case beyond a shadow of a doubt, or
That's true.
certainly beyond reasonable doubt. They have an extremely high conviction rate. It's close to 98%. So it's looking like he will probably take a plea. He could, of course, it's his right to take this to a jury trial, but that is a Herculean task to try to prove your innocence after you yourself confessed to the investigators and
Post
they,
Miranda, absolutely.
right. Even if he wasn't, when they show up at your door, if they can still use that stuff against you. But I would guess that this case is heading towards a plea resolution.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned Brian Sterling earlier, the new U.S. attorney for the state of South Carolina, but Emily Limehouse down in that Charleston office, I believe she's one of the prosecutors on this case.
And I've had the pleasure of watching her in court before, and she's extremely
She doesn't
effective as a
miss.
prosecutor.
She does not miss, bottom line, when it comes to bringing cases like this. Doing amazing work on this. I want to shift gears. We've talked about these just two awful cases. I do want to shift gears and bring our law enforcement focus up to Columbia, South Carolina, because folks who have been following it, the South Carolina State Election Commission, they've been in a high-profile court battle. A Democrat minority leader in the South Carolina Senate brought a lawsuit against the Election Commission, demanding that they not release South Carolina's voter files to the federal government. Now, this was a lawsuit that was initially upheld by a left-leaning Republican-appointed judge. Imagine that here in South Carolina. But initially, the Election Commission was enjoined from providing that list to the feds. But now the Supreme Court has come in, overruled that, and said, hey, we're basically siding with the governor, with the legislative leaders, and with the Trump administration. But as that was unfolding, pretty significant drama involving a lot of information, as that was unfolding, we started receiving reports about some background activity at the Election Commission, and in particular, allegations that certain election officials had perhaps been working with some of the folks that brought this lawsuit. Now, we're still investigating that, but as we were digging, on Wednesday of this week, the State Election Commission held a meeting, a regular scheduled meeting. It wasn't an emergency meeting, but to our surprise, they go into executive session for more than 5 hours, come out and announce that Howie Knapp, the executive director of the State Election Commission, a guy who has been under a state law enforcement investigation for over a year. In fact, we reported on that investigation back in January. But they announced that he had been relieved of his duties, a new interim appointed. And then the next morning, Dylan, John Monk at the state reported that agents of the State Law Enforcement Division were on the premises inside the Election Commission.
Presumably talking to some of his former deputies.
Yeah, well, and in fact, shortly after Mr. Monk's story broke, and you got to give John Monk credit, man. That guy he gets the good scoop, man. But shortly after his report broke, we reported on why they were there, allegations of wiretapping.
Wow.
By the now former South Carolina State Election Director. And this is something, Dylan, this is a guy we know, Howie Knapp. We've worked with Howie Knapp in the past. He's a guy who, at least until Andy reported on the fact he was being investigated criminally, he had a pretty good relationship with us. Apparently got upset that we confirmed a criminal investigation into him. I'm not sure what we were supposed to do in that situation, but this thing has kind of very quickly spiraled into something bigger than just somebody being relieved of their duties by the commission. This seems like there's a real criminal component. In fact, SLED confirmed a second criminal investigation into him just this week.
Well, yeah, you talked about this wiretapping investigation. As I understand it, this was related to the aforementioned meeting, which went 5 hours into executive session. Obviously, the investigation, which Andrew confirmed, this was a year before that. So there was clearly some sort of criminal nexus which got SLED poking around there. Now, whether they will charge with a crime and prove a crime in court, obviously it's far too early to say, but there was some other reason that SLED decided to start poking its nose around the Election Commission and around its former director.
Yeah, and indeed it was a political situation too. Obviously, the 5 commissioners of this Election Commission, they're appointed by the governor. Now, he does statutorily have to put one Democrat on that panel, but it was a 3-2 vote to oust Howie Knapp. It was a very close vote. And so the fact that apparently this eavesdropping, wiretapping allegation potentially tied to that vote, just crazy, Dylan. We're going to keep following that case, though, folks. We have been, again, at the forefront of that inquiry, and it is very significant because we talk about electoral integrity. We talk about the sanctity of the vote, and to have this kind of chicanery by this guy, I think it's good they got him out.
Well, after all the heinous stuff we've talked about this episode, a little wiretapping doesn't sound that bad.
Yeah. Well, unless it's our ballots that we're talking about.
Then it doesn't sound so good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully the new interim director, Jenny Wooten, she is apparently the niece of a federal judge. Hopefully Jenny Wooten will get that agency back on track. We will obviously keep close tabs on this investigation into Howie Knapp as it continues, as we head into a very busy, very important.
Sounds like Howie might be keeping closer tabs.
Yeah, sounds like he might. We got to sweep the
I
office
wonder if
here.
we got any microphones in here.
Yeah, Howie Knapp, bugging the Fitz office. How interesting would that be? But pivotal election cycle coming up, Dylan, and obviously we got to be able to trust the ballots. So let's hope that the new executive director over there gets that agency sorted out.
Indeed.
Thanks, Dylan. Good work.
Thanks, Will.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for this week's edition. A big thank you to our Andy Fancher, Jen Wood, and Dylan Nolan, who, by the way, not only appears on the show, but produces this whole thing, folks. This is the kind of journalism, again, independent, unapologetic, hard-hitting. If you support it, if you support the accountability it brings, the impact it's having on the process, please support our work. It is your support, your subscribing, and referring friends, neighbors to subscribe that keeps us going, keeps these lights on, keeps these mics going, empowers all of our work. Thanks again for your support, and we will catch you next time on The Week in Review.